Great. Well, like I said, I'm excited to talk about companion planting, and this is kind of a big topic. So I tried to kind of consolidate it into basically talking about the principles of companion planting. I'm going to focus on vegetable and flower gardens, and I've also sprinkled in some perennial discussion as well. I really want this presentation to be as engaging as possible, so feel free to I would say maybe either use the raise your hand function if you want to ask a question, or if you want to put any questions in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as well. But there will be time at the end, just to answer any lingering questions. And I have a couple of questions for you guys as we go through the presentation. So today's plan is to start with the definition. I always find it helpful to make sure we're all on the same page when we're talking about a particular topic. So we'll define what is companion planting. Most of the presentation will be going through what I would consider the principles of companion planting. And as we discuss those, we'll also look at the benefits and examples of each of them. And then at the very end, we will briefly discuss some tips for garden planning if you are interested in companion planting. So I like to keep the definition really simple. So most of the time when we're talking about companion planting, we're talking about growing multiple crops in the same area in a way that is mutually beneficial. I think that's the simplest way to put it. And oftentimes this type of garden practice may lead to higher crop yields, reduction in pest pressure, enhanced pollination, and a lot more, which we're going to get into in this presentation. And if it's helpful, I'm happy to share my slides afterwards. If you don't want to copy directly from them, I'm happy to do that. There's some really good photos giving examples throughout. So this photo right here, you can get a sense for some companion planting where we have some, actually these are fennel flowers. Just some fennel that we let go to seed, and it's intermixed with some zinnias, and there's also some Swiss chard kind of in the center here that's a little bit smaller. So I'd like to start off by asking you all, what are some of your favorite companion plantings? And it's okay if you don't know or you haven't practiced, but a lot of people, might have some plants that they like to plant together. Classic example is tomatoes and basil. Maybe you might throw in some marigolds in there. I'm curious if any of you have kind of your favorite go-to companion plantings. Feel free to shout it out or put it in the chat. I'll give you just a second to think about it.
Pamela, every year we do a variety. We do a variety of plants around the tomatoes. Primarily, it's the one that eats the bugs. You just said it.
Oh, is it marigolds?
Marigolds. Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Any other thoughts? Anything else you guys already do in your garden? I like, Barbara, your planting borage with everything. And we certainly have that at Tidewater Farm, where the borage just self-seeds pretty much everywhere in our Harvest for Hunger garden. Anything else anyone like to share before we move on? Okay, well, if you think of something, feel free to put in the chat and I'll be sure to touch on it. All right, so starting with, I call these principles, but I mean, there's no formal, this isn't a formal thing. These are just some of the guiding principles I think about when I consider how I'm gonna include different plants together, and how I am communicating with you all sort of like their benefits and general practices that you might want to consider. So the most important thing, I think, and why companion planting works so well is because it's diversifying your garden. And so to me, this is one of the biggest things that or reasons why we do companion planting. So a diversity of plants will lead to a diversity of insects. So although, you might think it's counterintuitive, right? Because you are bringing in more insects because of the different types of flowers, for example, or leaf tissue that insects might consume. But that's actually really a good thing, because what it means is that you're going to have a lot more what we might call beneficial insects that are going to prey on some of the pests that you have in your garden. So a couple examples of those are, I know a lot of people are scared of spiders, but spiders are incredible. They're incredible at eating other insects. Parasitoid wasps. So when you think about your tomato hornworm, and sometimes you'll see those eggs that are laid on the top of the hornworm, that's a good example of those wasps. Ladybird beetles will be attracted to your gardens. And these types of predatory and parasitic insects are going to help keep your pest population in check. But then the other side to that is that you're inviting more pollinators. And so that might improve the production of your garden. You're also providing wildlife habitat. So that's another big one to consider if that's a value that you hold close to you. So let's look at a couple of examples. But first, I forgot I included this example. So I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of some research that has been done. Generally speaking, I know that there's a lot of companion planting charts out there, right? Like plant this parsley with this crop. There's not actually a lot of research proving those connections. A lot of the support for those charts that are developed are mostly based on observations by gardeners, like what they notice works well together. However, there is some research showing that diversity of plants generally contributes to reduction in pests. And so I'd like to include this example from the University of California, because they essentially conducted an experiment where they had 4 varieties of different broccoli. And they found that in those test plots, aphid infestations decreased. So that's why we say, diversity in general is always a good rule of thumb. Whenever you can, whether it's diversity in the types of flowers that you're planting, different types of zinnias, or whether it's a diversity in just, across species, whether it's basil and parsley and tomatoes, trying to think about incorporating as many plants as you can. So we talked about spiders, and I have a couple examples I'm going to show you, but I found this huge yellow garden spider in one of our gardens at Tidewater, and it's hard to tell exactly how big the spider is, but it's huge. And so I tried to zoom in so you could get a better look at it, but the web itself is like way beyond this photo here. And I'd like to include this because there's so many different insects out there, and arthropods like spiders, and they are wonderful additions to your garden. And the nice thing about spiders is that they're all of them are predators. So they feed on insects in your garden in a variety of ways. This spider in particular, insects will get caught in the web because it has a huge web that it forms, and that's how they feed on their prey. While other spiders are actually more hunters. They will, for instance, jumping and wolf spiders, they're actually going to seek out their prey and catch them. But I just thought this was a cool example because essentially I did some research into yellow garden spider after I found this one, and this part of the garden kind of goes untouched for a while. So this spider is able to develop such a big web. And so that kind of, when you think about your garden space, like not like leaving some spaces untouched will actually have some benefits. So the spider was able to move in and develop and form this beautiful web and contribute to the beneficial insects in the garden. And also another tip for you is that incorporating different members of the Apiaceae family, so it's kind of the carrot family, is a great way to attract parasitic wasps. They tend to, so a couple examples from that family include cilantro, dill, fennel, and parsley. So if you let those flowers bloom, you'll end up seeing a lot of different types of wasp species on those flowers. Now, in my experience, I know some people might hear wasp and worry, is this insect going to sting me? My experience is that I've never been stung just because I have a diversity of plants and a lot of wasps in the garden. Generally speaking, they, aren't going to mess with you if you're not messing with them. So that's my general tip for you, is that in particular, dill and cilantro are very quick and easy to grow. You can easily seed them in your garden. Those two I'd recommend starting with. If you don't eat fennel yourself, but want to have it in your garden for the flowers and maybe pick off some of the leaves as an herb, fennel is another great one. Parsley, you would have to wait until the next year for the flower because it's a biennial. So it's not going to flower during that first year. And of course, incorporating annual herbs and flowers in your vegetable garden is always a great thing. These are just a couple examples that you could include in your garden. I love the Mexican sunflower. It makes a really great cut flower, and it attracts a lot of different pollinators. It does get pretty big, so you kind of need the space for it, but it's very easy to grow. And generally speaking, I know that Jay mentioned something about deterring deer. I find that deer really love the typical, sunflower. They love munching on sunflowers, but they don't tend to eat the Mexican sunflower as much. So thinking about which one would be better to grow, I really like the Mexican sunflower, and I think there are seed companies that offer in different colors too. So that's this here on the left-hand side. And then different types of basils. There's so many different types of basils out there. And we're going to talk more about that coming up. But I believe this is our holy basil that we had growing at Tidewater, and you'll see more of that coming up. But, there's lemon basil, Thai basil, cinnamon basil, so many different types that you could grow, not only for culinary use, but also for pollinators and to diversify your garden. And here's kind of an example of one of our more diverse gardens at Tidewater Farm. I think most of these pictures are from Tidewater, so I encourage you to visit. So this is part of our children's garden, and every year in this section, we always kind of switch it up and grow different plants. This year in particular, the combination of flowers just looked gorgeous. So we already had some garlic chives planted in there because we kind of wanted sort of the sensory garden feel. And we wanted to include some other colorful flowers and other fragrant herbs that kids could come and pick the leaves and smell and kind of engage in the space there. So we've got garlic chives, this beautiful purple flower, and then around it we planted a lot of different annual flowers. So holy basil is kind of in the front here, and over here on the right side, there's also this anise hyssop with this tall purple flower. And I think that was just a self-sown annual that popped up there. In the back here, we have aromato basil, which is a really nice cut flower, and it's a little bit taller than some of the other basils. We've got shorter marigolds over here, and zinnias here in the back. And so that same garden space, I'm showing you a picture of it the next year and how it changed and different combinations you can consider. So that area, we're trying to incorporate some more perennials just so it's lower maintenance. But we So we're kind of doing that over time, but we still love all the color that annuals bring. So we want to have a balance between the two. So this is from this past year, or past growing season. And we always had a little bit of butterfly weed in the front here, just because it's a really dry section. But we also added calendula, more of the aromato basil. We incorporated cosmos. I think that's a double click cosmos, which is really nice. We liked the zinnias, so we wanted to keep some of those. We incorporated some pale coneflower, which are these flower stalks right here. Again, this is a very dry site, so we're selecting our plants based off of the conditions of the site. Now we do have irrigation lines that go to the annuals though. So that's one thing that's important to note. And we always have common milkweed popping up everywhere. That's inevitable. And then we also have some celosia back here in the right, and more marigolds, which I think you can kind of see between the cosmos here. Just to give you a sense of like how garden spaces are changing constantly over time, but we're still applying the same companion planting principles to this space. So when you're thinking about diversity of plants, you also want to think about diversity of flower shapes if you are particularly interested in supporting pollinators. So I just included this example of some plants that have tubular flower shapes that attract hummingbirds. And after this past season, we saw a huge increase in hummingbirds in our garden space. Actually, this red cardinal flower is not at the gardens, but on the left side we have some pineapple sage, this red flower, and the blue salvia, and both have that tubular flower shape that hummingbirds really love. And usually pineapple sage flowers so late in the season, but this, with this last year, with it being so warm, it flowered a lot earlier than normal. Usually it flowers around mid-October if the temperatures still remain warm enough for it to flower. But pineapple sage, it's a lovely aromatic smell to the leaves, so it's a great, just for the color and the scent of the leaves, it's great to incorporate, but then it had that additional benefit of attracting hummingbirds as well when it flowered. So the other principle to consider with companion planting is maximizing your space, right? If you're able to plant a variety of different plants in one area, there's a lot of opportunities to maximize your space in the garden. And I think most gardeners have limited space. They don't have unlimited space, and also thinking about how, thinking about your own personal limits, you might not want your garden to be huge anyway, because you can't manage a garden of that size. So considering that, trying to use your space wisely. And so there's a lot of different techniques you can adopt to utilize the space the best way possible. And so a technique that some of you may be already familiar with is interplanting or intercropping. So a couple examples of those include planting shade-tolerant crops below trellis beans or cucumbers. You could plant onions or radishes between lettuce, thinking about how the lettuce is growing above ground and needs more space, where root crops tend to be a little bit, they have some leafy greens above ground, but really it's the root that's growing below ground and needs more space. So kind of matching those crops together. And also planting herbs or lettuce below tomatoes or peppers. So we talked about, I feel like tomatoes are classic, right? You want to plug in as much stuff as you can below. But you can also do that with peppers too. And it might be a nice succession, right? Because lettuce, if you were growing lettuce in the spring, you could plant it in a space where it's going to be pretty much harvested by the time you put your tomatoes in. So that's another consideration. However, it's important to be aware of planting space, right? Because it doesn't mean that you can just put a bunch of plants in one area, right? Plants need a certain amount of space to thrive, and there's a couple of reasons for that. So all plants need sufficient space for proper airflow and also to make sure they get enough sunlight. If you don't want to pack in your plants too closely that produce a fruit, right? Like thinking about tomatoes, because that tomato fruit needs enough sunlight for it to ripen on the vine. So being mindful of that and not trying to pack in too many plants in one space. Otherwise, there's a lot of issues that might come up in your garden. A lot of times planting too tightly can lead to disease and pest problems. It can cause competition for water and light, so your plants might not reach full maturity. And you just need to remember that you're trying to achieve the optimal growing conditions, right? And so putting them too close together is not going to do that. And I see some things in the chat, and I'm going to come back to those in just a little bit. So here's an example. So we have on this trellis is red Malabar spinach. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that plant. It's not a spinach, so the name is a little bit deceiving, but it is a tropical type plant. It's an annual. And so if you're looking for a summer green, I recommend Malabar spinach. It's really tasty. So it grows in the heat of the summer, and it's trellis. You actually support it, with a trellis because it's a vine, and it produces these really lovely flowers. So what we did was we put in this trellis at Tidewater Farm, and then, seeing that there's space around the trellis, we decided to plant a couple different things here. You can see we had a succession of different plants. I actually didn't label it, but we had some fennel that we had growing here early in the season, and most of it was harvested. You're just seeing some of the leaves that are left over that you could still harvest as an herb. But then we also planted beets on the outside because we were planning on harvesting those later in the fall, probably after the Malabar spinach has passed or towards the end of its life. So again, just trying to maximize your space by growing vertically, but then also having that ground cover or plants growing at the base of that trellis. And we talked a little bit about succession planting too, right? So we have this raised bed at Tidewater, and it looks pretty packed right now, but at the same time, some of these plants were just about ready to be harvested. Just had to get a photo before we harvested everything though. So in the center here, we have fennel. And then we also interplanted lettuce on both sides of the fennel, and then alternated and included some nasturtium. So the fennel was only going to grow until maybe about midsummer. The lettuce we were, I think, harvested maybe a day or two after this photo. So as soon as we harvest the lettuce, it'll make more room for the fennel to grow into its full-size bulb. And then the nasturtium is just going to hang out there all summer. So, and we can continue to harvest leaves and flowers as it continues to produce. And another just side note, this is maybe not an example of companion planting, although there's the trellis in the back, but thinking about utilizing your space better. Squash are excellent plants for kind of creating that ground cover. So again, you could have squash growing at the base of your trellis if you have like beans, pole beans growing there. And the nice thing is they do a pretty decent job of also keeping the weeds out. So we only had a couple of tall weeds that poked up here, but overall they were really great at keeping the weed pressure low, and also producing a ton of squash. This is a delicata patch right here, and we harvested at least 100 pounds out of this patch. So it was a decent harvest. And we're going to get to this in a little bit, but in maximizing your space, you also need to think about soil health, especially when it comes to annuals and vegetables. So we'll talk about that in a second. Oh, talk about it right now. Forgot that was the next one. That's a good segue, right? Uh, another principle is supporting soil health, because you can't optimize the space and interplant as closely as you'd like while maintaining optimal growing conditions without having good soil health. And so when we're talking about soil health here, we're really talking about growing annuals and vegetables. Soil health for perennials is totally different game, not the same discussion really. So there's a lot of different ways you can support soil health. The first thing I should say, and I probably should have included this on my list here, is regularly doing a soil test. So doing a soil test will allow you to keep an eye on the different major and micronutrient levels in your soil, what the pH is, how much organic matter you have. So I definitely recommend getting that done, especially if you've never done it before. And so we have soil test kits at our office that can be picked up. We can also mail them to you. And I think right now the cost is $18 per sample for just a basic test. And if you have a small garden, you probably just need to submit one sample. But that's really nice. I kind of think about it in terms of like when you get blood work done, right? Like you need the baseline for your soil health. We need the baseline for our health when we get blood work done. So that soil test will be really helpful in guiding what you need, how you might need to amend your soil, whether you need to add organic matter to it, or whether you have too much and you need to lay off the compost or something for a year or two. But there's other ways that you can support soil health. So some of those examples include growing root crops to aerate the soil and break up compaction. Keeping in mind that if the soil is really compact, the root crops probably won't grow that well there. But in a regular garden, they can be really helpful for kind of breaking up the soil. Planting legumes to fix nitrogen. So some of us already plant beans and peas. That's a great way to further increase the amount of nitrogen available in your soil. A lot of times you need to leave those roots in place to really have the full effect on your garden. So maybe do a little research there before going in that direction. But also incorporating cover crops. I always encourage home gardeners to consider cover crops because there's a lot of situations that it might be a good fit for you. Say you need to take a season off, or you want to kind of hold one of your beds, or try to manage the weeds before you start planting in there. So there's a lot of situations where cover crops might be appropriate for you. And also planting based on crop needs, right? So thinking about water, sun, and nutrient needs, and making sure you're planting those crops together that are going to be beneficial, and it's not going to be a drain on your current soil health. And of course, a quick note about soil health. So I had mentioned nutritional needs. And what I kind of like to simplify this idea. So if you're a vegetable gardener and you're thinking, I have no idea what my vegetable nutrient or the nutrient needs of my vegetable crops that I grow. You really don't have to think about it as a hard science. I like to think about it in terms of what we consider light or medium feeders are crops that are leafy greens, roots, or perhaps they're short season. So, thinking about radishes, like they are quick to grow. Usually they only take 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, depending on the variety you're growing. And if you compare that with the heavy feeders, which are more like tomatoes and peppers and things that take a full season or produce a fruit, those plants are gonna have higher nutritional needs. So the reason I bring this up is because you don't necessarily want to plant a tomato plant that is intercropped with peppers and other plants that have that are considered heavy feeders, right? Because you're going to be I'm going to, for lack of a better word or description, kind of draining the nutrient availability of your soil, right? So you want to make sure you kind of have a balance. So this is why certain intercropping or interplanting works so well, because onions and lettuces are a great combination, because lettuces are pretty quick, right? They might only take 4 weeks. Onions, depending on what kind you're growing, might need a full season, so they're a little bit heavier feeders. So combining them together means that they're a good match. And so I think the key here is just remembering balance, right? You don't want to take too much from your garden. You want to make sure you're also returning those nutrients by doing your soil testing and amending your soil. And not kind of overdoing it, right? And that's why cover crops are also nice, because you can put a pause on things for a little bit and let the soil continue to build.
She looking for you? Oh no, she's still in here. She heard you go out.
So cover crops, a couple examples. Again, I feel like cover crops are not just for farmers or for gardeners. So we plant a lot of different cover crops at Tidewater, and we don't have a lot of land. We have some raised beds, we've got some in-ground beds in the field. One thing we like to do is plant a combination of peas and oats at the end of the season, so we have something holding our soil in place. So you'll see up here on the left-hand side, we've got peas and oats planted here. And we just so happen to be replacing those raised beds at the end of the season. So we got a nice cross section of the soil where you can see the roots are holding the soil nicely in place, which was great for when we dismantled the beds, because none of the soil kind of poured out. So that's a great example of something you could do at the end of the season to maximize your space and continue to give back to your garden. And then over here, we were establishing some new garden beds. So we planted buckwheat in the summer because we knew we weren't going to be able to get something in the ground soon enough. But we wanted to make sure the weeds didn't take over the beds, right? So if you're establishing a new garden bed, this might be a good approach. And you can take a section, of your garden, talking about diversifying, and just sow some cover crops in certain areas. Buckwheat is great for the summer, and it was actually, I couldn't find a good photo or a video of it, but the bees were all over this buckwheat. It was really beautiful. And I just so happened to capture the monarch on the buckwheat flower. So I'm like, I got to share that at least, give you something. But it can be really fun to incorporate some cover crops into your gardening, and again, further diversify and grow a variety of plants. I mentioned how root crops can help improve soil structure by kind of breaking up compaction and aerating the soil. So we had planted some carrots and beans in some of these newly established beds at Tidewater. And I included this photo because you can see after our volunteer Linda was pulling up some of these carrots, they made some really nice holes in the soil, right? So that airspace is really great for, allowing water and critters and everything to move throughout the soil structure. Before I cover the next one, I'm just going to take a quick sip of water, and I see another question in the chat, which I'll come back to. All right. So I think this is the last principle. So really, as a result, you can imagine companion planting, which includes diversifying your garden, is going to create a beautiful garden. You're going to have so much diversity in color and texture just by implementing these practices. And again, you can, I already said diversifying for colors and textures and landscapes, but also, we're focusing today on kind of annuals and vegetables and herbs, but this could also work for perennials too. Thinking about what the needs are. This does not companion planting doesn't need to be limited to annuals in particular. So thinking about creating continuous blooms throughout the season, that's going to create a beautiful garden space. And then I hope this video works. We had this garden called the All America Selection Garden at Tidewater. And this one day the sun was just so bright and the garden was just like glistening with color. And so we kind of in this garden plant a variety of different flowers and tomatoes and perennials. And I just couldn't help but snap this quick video of the garden. And again, different colors, textures, you know, blooms throughout the season. You might have seen a couple bees on the marigolds. It's like so cute to see bumblebees digging into a marigold flower and essentially like getting lost in there because it's so fluffy. Yeah, it's just, you can do a lot with your garden by diversifying it alone. Nope. All right, I'm going to pause there for a second and look at the chat, and then we'll talk about some tips. Let's see. Barbara, I'm really glad you mentioned alyssum because that's another really good one. A lot of people plant those as kind of, alyssum's great for kind of the ground cover plant. A lot of people interplant them with onions. And there is actually some research showing that alyssum is an excellent companion plant. I'll have to find that information, but that's in one of the resources that I have at the end. Let's see. Oh, okay. It looks like the other Barbara's giving some advice about fencing. Yeah, Jay, I think deer deterrence, you know, that's a tough one, right? I think trying to choose varieties and plants that deer don't prefer, but that's really tricky because in my experience last summer with the drought, deer would eat anything. So they munched away multiple times at our tomatoes, which I've never had that problem before. So I think, you know, weather dependent, there's plants that they don't tend to eat, but I feel like some of the plants we planted parsley and marigolds, they didn't tend to eat those. I think doing your best to, again, if you diversify what you plant, there's definitely something in there your deer won't eat, or deer in your area. I know that might not be the best advice, but at least observing to see what they do and don't like in your area. And then question about cover crops for shady areas. Some of the cover crops, I'm not sure how shady, Liza, you're thinking, but some of the cover crops actually do really well in shady spots. I would say more so partial shade. Peas and oats would do really well in shady spots. I guess it depends on what you're thinking, but certainly like more of the perennial cover crops, a lot of those do better in shady spots. So I'm thinking about clovers, for an example. They don't necessarily need to be in full sun. So it might depend on your situation and how soon you plan on using that space for a garden. But there are definitely some good options out there for you. And Suzanne, I'm glad to hear that you're hoping to stop by the gardens. That was going to be my last slide, is trying to encourage you to come out to the gardens. So I know it's a little bit of drive from Harpswell, but the gardens are open to the public from sunrise to sunset every day of the week. So come out anytime. Obviously, there's not a lot to look at right now, but I think it's fun to come back a couple times throughout the growing season because you can really see how things change. They change so quickly, even by the week. So definitely come out and check out the gardens. Any other questions before I finish up here? I just got a couple more slides. Okay. So I'm hoping that some of these guidelines have helped you kind of think about companion planting in a different way. There is no structure, right?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of rigid rigidity to how you go about it. I think just sticking with some of those guidelines of diversity and soil
I was gonna
health.
put them in a plastic bag, that in their little bucket. You know what I mean?
Oh, and Mary, do you think you could mute yourself? It sounds like we can hear your conversation. Thank you, Mary. So just to give you some ideas for planning, right? If you're at this point where you're like, I still have no idea how I'm going to include companion planting into my garden. So again, companion planting does not need to be technical. It can be really simple, and there's not a ton of research, as I mentioned early on, about specific crops going well together. A lot of that is based off of observation. So I encourage you to be an observer in your garden and see what works and what doesn't, and go visit other gardens to get ideas and inspiration. But if you're thinking about your garden right now, consider starting small. Start with a section of your garden, especially if you have a lot of space, because that can be kind of overwhelming to think about all the possibilities. So start just with a section and make a list of the plants you'd like to grow, and consider some of their growing characteristics, right? So think about their height, space, water, sunlight needs. And then kind of match plants you think would grow well together. Maybe you saw it growing in a garden. Maybe you've heard a friend talk about a combination of plants, and try to think about planting those plants together, and think about, if it's a vegetable, when are they harvested, right? So maybe you can match some of those spring crops with some summer crops, like I mentioned, onions and lettuce is a good example. As soon as you harvest the lettuce, your onions are going to start getting bigger and will need more space. So that's a good combination right there. And I think it's always helpful, at least for me, I'm very much a visual person, is to just draw a simple map. It's not anything you need to stick with. I've kind of given up on planning my garden too much each year, because I'm always kind of like last minute. I'm like, oh, I just have a lot of parsley, I'm just going to throw that in. I used to stick with the schedule and all of that, and then I found that just doesn't work for me, or I just end up abandoning it through the season because I have other ideas as the season goes on. But if you're getting started with this, it's definitely helpful to draw a map to start thinking about how things will kind of fit together, especially as you think about like the growing characteristics, right? Because some plants are going to be a lot taller than others. So for that, you might want to plan a little bit better and think about, oh, the Mexican sunflower might get to be 6 feet tall, so I don't want that to shadow or create shade for my tomato plants. So being strategic in how you're going to be placing those. And then just observe how things go and continue to keep interplanting crops. If a space opens up, I like to have some seeds on hand of different crops, like I mentioned, cilantro and dill, where I can just sprinkle those in when space opens up. So having those kind of things can be helpful, so that you continue to keep that space covered and growing, because otherwise, when you think about it, weeds might pop up. So you might as well put something in there. So having some of those crops that are quick to grow, you'll get benefits right away. You can either harvest the leaves, or you can have the flowers or even the seed, right? So keeping that in mind, it's really nice to have some of those direct sown crops available at hand when you need them. So I would love to hear if you guys have any ideas for how you might do this in your garden, and no pressure, but if you're like, oh, I want to try out this combination, or I in hearing this presentation thought of something that might work for me. Do you guys have any ideas of how you might do companion planting in your garden? Feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself if you'd like.
Pamela, this is Nancy. I like the idea of planting basil and marigolds around my tomatoes. I'm going to try that this year.
Nice, that's a good one. Any other brave souls out there interested in sharing?
Hi there, it's Becky. I I let the dill go to seed every year, so I always have some dill popping up between other things. So that's one thing that I've done already. But the idea of putting low things underneath the ones that grow taller is something I haven't really tried. So I'm going to try to implement that in a couple of spots this summer.
Nice.
Hi, this is Catherine. I'm really going to try to, I know you're talking about soil health and balance some of the heavy feeders you're saying with the light feeders. I think it'll help the soil a lot and test my soil a little bit more too. Since I have some new property, I'm trying to figure out where the best places are to grow things. And so I just opened up actually just a piece of soil, and I'm trying, that's kind of, I call it my cutting garden, that I'm mixing actually vegetables, which you suggested, thank you, is great for putting vegetables with perennials and annuals. And then I'm experimenting by putting it in all different areas. But anyway, the idea of the light with the heavy, I'm going to try to concentrate on that a little bit more this summer.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that, Kathy. It sounds like you have a lot of good ideas. And also it's fun when you have a blank canvas to work with. And yeah, and definitely I think as soon as you start thinking in that mindset of kind of light, heavy feeders, I think it'll just come naturally. You'll be like, okay, I know automatically like this crop shouldn't be planted with this one. So good for you.
Pam, this is Suzanne. I also want to say that I like to mix in containers some vegetables and some flowers. One thing I think about is Swiss chard because of the color. It looks good, you know, around the edges when you're growing, you know, flowers that might contrast with the foliage of the Swiss chard. So sometimes my Swiss chard doesn't get eaten, but it looks really nice around flowers. So just a thought for people.
That's a great example. I love Swiss chard in kind of a more ornamental garden. Even the color is beautiful. It doesn't tend to have a lot of pests. You know, maybe if you have a deer coming through, it might munch on it, but generally it doesn't. So it's really holds up well even through the heat of the summer. And Barbara, I love what you said about your garden is half zinnias and half everything else. That sounds like a garden I'd like to see.
This is Tucky. I live on a lot which is 90% ledge. And so I'm sort of committed to raised beds, and we did bring in some soil for 2 other spots, but beyond that, I'm sort of committed to a very limited area. And do you ever enrich the soil with fertilizers, or do you only use plants to enrich the soil?
Yeah, that's a great question and such a common question, right? So I think so the general rule of thumb, and it's always gets a little confusing, right? Because everyone's gardening situation is different, but generally, you know, it's best to garden in soil, right? So the natural native soil. And in that case, you really want to just amend that soil based off of soil test results if you are growing vegetables and annual flowers and annual herbs. If you amend your soil based on those results, you don't need to do regular fertilizer. There is a general recommendation for fertilizer if you haven't done a soil test, and it's just kind of a generic, this is a good fertilizer, all-purpose fertilizer to apply, and I can share that maybe with Nancy later on for your group. But that's kind of a stopgap measure, right? Like it's best to know what's going on in your soil through the test results. Even if you just do a baseline and don't do a test for a while, it's good to have that information. If you amend your soil, you don't need to do fertilizer. But again, if you get into the season and didn't get around to doing the soil test, there are some generic recommendations. So does that answer your question, Tucky?
Yes, Yeah, it
Okay.
does. Thank you. That's helpful. I
Yeah,
think
and like
a soil test.
soil test is the best way to go. Otherwise, there's generic recommendations. The other caveat to that is, you know, if people grow in containers, right? A lot of times if you grow in containers, you're using a potting mix from your local nursery, and in which case that potting mix does not have kind of like the minerals and all the regular things that native soil has. So if you are growing in a potting mix, you actually do need to apply fertilizer on a regular basis. Not a ton, but like a couple times throughout the season, because it isn't really soil. It's a soilless mix. It might have some compost in there, but that's not really going to provide the nutrients your plants need. That's really just going to build your organic matter. So if you're growing in containers and using potting mix you bought in bags, you probably should apply fertilizer, in which case we do have a fact sheet about that exactly, which I can share with Nancy afterwards. Is it too soon in the season to test soil? If you can work the soil at this time, if it's not frozen, you can technically test it. One thing to keep in mind is that you don't want your soil to be super wet when you send it up to the lab. So usually if I'm collecting a sample, I like to let the soil dry out a little bit more before I collect it, but I can also collect it and leave it in a bucket somewhere and let it dry out for a couple weeks before I send it to the lab. So you have a couple of options. It's really, I recommend testing soil in the fall generally, because some amendments, and also if you need to amend your pH, it's going to need more time to really have an impact on your soil. So if you do the testing in the spring and find you need to adjust your pH, that's not going to necessarily impact your growing season for that spring, because it just needs more time to kind of work into the soil, to put it simply. So if you're able to test in the early fall, that's the best time in my experience. But otherwise, any time is better than no time, right? So testing in the spring is also fine.
Pamela, it's Nancy again. I would appreciate your slides and I'll distribute them out to the garden club members.
Awesome.
And anything else you want to share.
That sounds great. I have a list of stuff I've talked about, and I also, I'll just show you real quick. I'm done, but I have just 2 slides to show you, I think. I won't go through the summary because I feel like we really drove this in. But visit the gardens. Here's just a quick snapshot of our new field that we installed. And if you come by the gardens and you see me there, I'm happy to talk to you about it. We have a variety of different vegetables and flowers that we grow here, and all of it is donated. So come see us at the gardens. And more photos of the gardens, because I want to take advantage of you guys here now looking at these photos. And resources. So Nancy, I'll send you these resources as well as the things I mentioned and a copy of the slides. And this is all I have for you guys. So I think I'm done.
We do field trips in the summer, so maybe we'll plan a field trip to Tidewater Farms.
Yeah, please do. We online on our website, and I'll share this with you, Nancy. We have a form if you want to request a garden tour. So if you guys can come anytime, but if you would like a garden tour by either myself or a Master Gardener volunteer, fill out that form and we can schedule a time this summer.
Great.
I had a quick question which kind of got lost in the chat, but can we get soil tests through the extension office?
Yes, you can. So if you happen to be in the Falmouth area, we have them outside of our office door. You can pick them up anytime. They're in the lobby. So the lobby's open pretty much 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Every day of the week. If you can't make it there, you can either send us an email at the office and we'll put one in the mail for you, or you can request one on our soil testing lab website.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Pamela?
I just want to say how informative this was and how really enjoyable, and the slides are fabulous. Thank you on a gloomy winter day.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela. It was excellent. And we did have 22 garden club members on viewing, so that's really good.
No problem. Thanks for having me, you all, and I'll follow up with Nancy with what I promised. So thanks
Okay.
again.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.